Okay, we're back. I'm Mike Cody. I'm the editor of Colorado Biz Magazine, and thanks, Tom, for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm going to briefly introduce the people on the panel this evening. Jack Rizzo is Chief Sustainability Officer for Prologis. He's responsible for implementing the company's global sustainability initiatives and for maintaining the company's leadership position in business excellence, environmental stewardship, and corporate social responsibility. Boy, the world's changed a lot in the past 10 years.
Sure has.
And then Linda Lawson, who was most recently a board member on Pioneer Natural Resources. Tell us a little bit more about your background. You're a late entry to our panel.
Pioneer Natural Resources is an oil and gas exploration company out of Dallas, has over $2 billion in sales, had probably 1,000 employees, and in the 7 years that I was on the board, went through a lot of different strategies as to what would make the company the most successful. So very interesting from moving from a large international company to a small domestic-oriented, focused oil and gas exploration company.
Thanks for joining us, Linda. Mary Beth Vitale is a general management executive with 25 years experience in the telecommunications and consumer products industry. She has a long, long history here. She was chairman of the board for Westwood Media. She spent 5 years on the board of Intrado, sitting on the audit, compensation, and corporate governance committees, and she spent 3 years with RMI, sitting on the audit committee. It goes on and on. She has a lot of experience to share with us tonight. Thank you. I'm going to start with some questions that Tracy threw at me to start, and I'll start with Mary Beth. You're a board member at both private and public companies. Tell us a little bit about the differences and the similarities between those two types of boards.
Well, there definitely is a big difference between private and public. When you start with a private company board, you need to look at the cap table there, because many times the founder is the largest shareholder, and usually funding has come from friends and family, or the uncles or the relatives, and so the role of the board is more of an advisory type role, usually in a private company, giving help on strategy and advice to the founders, usually is what ends up being on the private company, but also they're looking to you for your contacts to help the business grow. So usually in a private company, looking, what can you bring to the table to help the company grow? When you look at a public company, that definitely is not necessarily the case. I chair the audit committee for CoBiz Financial. They're about a $2.5 billion financial holding company, and I can bring some deals to the table and some contacts, but that's not what they're looking for. So on a public company board, the board's role is definitely different in terms of your responsibilities to shareholders and stakeholders that are out there. And so you're really responsible to make sure that the SEC filings are done appropriately, if you have regulatory issues, that you are in compliance with those. You're making sure that the tough decisions, such as capital raises, are done appropriately, looking at, does that dilute the shareholders? So your role is definitely different from private companies, and so I'm not sure if that was what you were looking for.
Expectations are different. Sure.
Definitely.
Linda, care to add to that from your experience?
I think one of the major differences in public versus private is that as board members, you are responsible for CEO succession and CEO evaluation. And as companies move from private to public, the board constitution and characteristics change from the needs that you have as a private board to a public board, and frequently the CEO requirements do also. So sometimes that gets into quite a bit of strain as the board members change out from those that were part of the capital entrepreneurship of the private corporation, and then moving to the public corporation, where the board members are now representing the shareholders and are not just the advisors to the CEO any longer.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. This was for Jack. Tell us about the Sustainability Committee, and who would be the best candidates to be on that type of committee, and what does the committee do?
At Prologis, we really started to focus on sustainability and really what it meant as a corporate initiative. And I think that's important that you understand the goals and objectives of your sustainability initiatives. So what we did, we really started to focus on it in 2007 and established a committee of the board of 3 members, a sustainability committee, in addition to audit and in governance and comp committees. We now have a sustainability committee. And what we did with them is we made them part of the process to establish what the mission statement was as it relates to sustainability for the corporation. And if I asked everyone in this room, what does sustainability mean to you? Most people will migrate to energy efficient. How are we saving, how are we recycling our content on site, things of that nature. What sustainability means to us at Prologis is more than that. It really is in line with what they call the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, if some of you are familiar with that. Talks about 3 dimensions of your business. You've got your environmental stewardship part of your business, you've got your ethics and governance, and you've got your social responsibility. And so we now report under those GRI guidelines, and I've heard several people make comments about transparency. What that does for you is it gives you tremendous transparency as to what you're doing and how you're benchmarking your company and what your goals and objectives are as it relates to sustainability. So the board, the committee, actually helped us craft those mission statements. We not only have a corporate mission statement as it relates to sustainability, but also mission statements for each dimension under our overall corporate responsibility initiative.
This is slightly off the subject of boards, but how does that play out in different parts of the world? You have warehouses all over the place.
I mean, actually, there's a higher level of focus on sustainability in Europe than there is here. We've got a fairly large platform in Europe, and we're probably, as it relates to energy efficiency, we're probably 5 to 10 years behind them in their thinking. Actually, our colleagues over there have really given us some good guidance as to where we think the U.S. will be in the next 3 to 5 years. So I think it plays out very well. Everyone is very interested in understanding what the goals and objectives are and what the mission is as it relates to sustainability and corporate responsibility. So I think it's in line.
Thank you. And what types of people would sit on that board? What are you looking for?
Well, fortunately, we have one board member that was a VP of sustainability for a Fortune 100 company, so that happened to work out pretty well, and he gave us some really good guidance on the mission statements. We're also looking for someone more on the technical side because the environmental side is important. We've focused heavily, that's my background, is more on the construction side and technical side, so we've got a member that has focused on that. And then the third member of the board was involved with the sustainability committee for another Fortune 50 company.
Thank you, Jack. Tracy, we talked a little bit about this on the phone. Tell me what you see. This is no longer a novelty. This is something that boards across the country are starting to activate.
Well, I think as we see sustainability as part of our economy, as that grows, obviously boards need to have some representation, especially the real estate industry. I have like 3 different categories that I see as emerging, and I might put it somewhat into resource management. And so as directors, where are our resources going? What is the impact that they're having? And driving very explicit conversations around that rather than implicit. So that would be, I think it would be a strong piece of a board, especially those that are in companies, Pepsi-Cola and some of the other ones that are using a lot of water. You're seeing that kind of conversation happen. So.
Thank you, Tracy. This one's for Mary Beth, so we can send the mic down this way. Okay, so I'm on a private board. I want to graduate to be on a public board. What should I be doing to prepare myself for that change from going maybe from a startup to a much bigger company?
Well, I sometimes I don't even look at it as graduating because, they offer, for me personally, offer 2 totally different experiences. So I don't think of my private company board less than my public company boards that I do sit on. So they offer different challenges and different interests. But I think even prior to us all coming up on stage, a lot of the people in the audience here was asking, how do you get on a public company board? And It is not, there is not a clear path to it, and it's not, it's more of an art than a science to get on the board. But I'll give you some tips that have been effective in terms of trying to be on a public company board. One is be on one, because then you'll get on another one. That tends to be one way, but before you get on the first one, you need to let people know that you are interested in being on a board and what you bring to the table to that board. So the more that you can let people know that you're interested in going on a board, especially if they currently sit on boards, that's one avenue in order to do that. Networking is always good. Where you're going to find other board members, National Association of Corporate Directors, there's lots of directors that are there that you can let them know that you want to be on a board. Tracy mentioned that about 50% of boards hire executive search firms to do their search. So it's important that you have made sure that your resume is in that particular search firm for board positions. That does help, but again, even when a recruiter comes to look to you for a job, they have been given such a very narrow, finite scope of the type of person they're looking for. And if you don't fit exactly into that box, your resume doesn't even get pulled. Same thing goes for a board position. So if a board says, well, I'm going to hire Korn Ferry or Spencer Stewart to do a board search, and they say, well, we're looking for somebody with banking experience, and I'd like to have this person, to be, in this range of experience and exposure, and I want this person to look like this and whatever. If you don't fit in that box, you don't even get presented to the client, which eliminates, unfortunately, a lot of people. So I think very few searches end up, being, able to get that. So, but it's always worth it for you to be able to make sure that your resume is in there. Of the public company boards that I've been on, I was able to get on those boards from all different angles. It wasn't the same one. One was just doing my own networking and saying, do you know somebody that's on a board and they're looking for an opportunity? The other one was lawyers. A lot of law firms are counsel to public company boards, and a lot of times they know when a board opportunity would happen. And so one of the boards that I do sit on, that's how I knew the lawyer. I told the lawyer I was looking for another opportunity, and about 2 years later, that's when an opportunity came up. So even once you've made your first contact in wanting to be on a board, it may take 2 to 3 years before anything really comes of it. And I know Tracy had a slide up there talking about that CEOs really do not have input, or I shouldn't say do not have the decision-making to hire somebody to be coming on your board. Well, good corporate governance says that they shouldn't, because it should be a separation and there should be the independence for that. But they do have influence. I mean, they definitely will do the screening at least at some point. They want to ensure that the collegiality in the board is going to continue, so they want to have at least collegiality, which does not mean that you all are being a yes man or person to that particular CEO. So I think that there's lots of ways. It's not an easy process if you want to get on it, but the more networking and the more people know, the better chance you have.
How many boards are you on right now?
Currently, I'm on 4 boards. I sit on 2 public company boards, CoBiz Financial and Zynex Medical, which is a medical device board. And then I sit on a privately held software company board called Iris in the business intelligence space, which is, just a really great, exciting startup. And I shouldn't say startup, but in terms of funding and all of that. And then I sit on the National Association of Corporate Directors. I'm their treasurer and their incoming president for this year.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Linda, I'm going to direct the next question at you. And Mary Beth gave me a great segue. I'm looking for a board member. One of the boxes is does not look like a woman. One of the items on the table for this new regulation coming through is the diversity of boards. Now we have, I would say, a statistical anomaly here with 3 women and 1 guy talking about corporate boards. Corporate boards have not been very good about bringing women and minorities. And of course, as I'm sure you've all seen, there are studies showing, particularly with women, that put more women on your boards, make more money because women buy stuff. Tell me about what's changed and what experience you've seen over the years, and do we see, is there some change happening? Are the makeups of boards starting to change at all?
I think the composition of boards is changing to include ethnic and racial diversity as well as including females. I think Tracy probably has the most recent statistics, but it's less than 15% of publicly held companies have women on their boards. Is that correct?
We've been for 3 or 4 years, about 15% of public company boards have been women. First quarter of '09, the stats were at, and there was 101 public placement of directors, and 38 of those were women. So again, think of this pre-legislation. That was first quarter of '09. December 16th, SEC did pass that disclosure rule, which, again, on diversity, it's not a certain amount of ethnicity or a certain amount of gender. It's just disclose where the diversity is on your board. So, and I think diversity in thought really will be something that's looked at. CalPERS and CalSTRS, I'm sure you know CalPERS, but CalSTRS, they're in a development phase right now as a partnership, and they are looking to work with nominating committees and to influence them on who, again, gets on that proxy access. And there'll be, so far anyway, the word is that they're going to look at databases to fit this diversity of thought from the National Association of Corporate Directors, Boardroom Bound, which is a company on the East Coast that promotes women. So again, back to that idea that we have an evolving business model, and even though it's been rather staid, the board model has been rather staid, it's trying to operate in an increasingly complex environment. So how does the board model get modified? One way it'll be who sits on the board.
I'd like to add to what Tracy said about diversity of thought. And in sitting on the Pioneer Natural Resources Board for 7 years, I would say that that was probably one of the most satisfactory experiences, was listening to the diversity of thought and background that the Board of Director members brought to the table, and then how the decisions were made. And frequently, you may find that you think you have a position as you go into a board meeting from reading the particular board prepared materials, but as you get in there and listen to your fellow directors and understand more about their background and what they bring to the table, you may find yourself changing the way you might vote. So I think diversity of thought, as opposed to just diversity of individuals, is really critical to the board makeup. And as Tracy said in her presentation, frequently in evaluations of boards, they will take the chart and determine what characteristics they need now and what characteristics they need 3 years from now, and then determine who's leaving the board and who they need to start finding 2 or 3 years in advance of that individual leaving, so that they have the right person and go through all of the right processes in order to bring someone on the board that's willing to take the risk of being a board member and is the appropriate person to fill the slot for the characteristics that are needed to support the shareholders.
I'll just add one other thing here. You were talking about how Europe is ahead in sustainability. Well, Europe is ahead when it comes to diversity, at least gender diversity. In the Netherlands, it's mandated that 50% of the board must be female, or 50% must be male on the board in those countries out there. So they're ahead of it, and I agree with Linda. It's really diversity of thought that you're looking for. It doesn't matter, whether it's, your gender. But at CoBiz, it is kind of unusual. We have 3 women that are on the board, which is rare in the financial industry, and we're all named Mary. So maybe that's a prerequisite.
Note to people out there, be Mary. Tracy talked a little bit about this and some of these changes that are coming on, scaring away maybe some of the best potential directors. Tell me about what some of your concerns are about these regulations, and are they going to be just another headache like Sarbanes-Oxley that just create more paperwork but doesn't really have the intended effect?
I don't know that's really going to scare away directors. You're either going to be on a board or not. You don't want to be foolish. You want to make sure you have D&O insurance. And make sure you understand D&O insurance and understand Side A policies, and make sure you're steeped into that knowledge. So, my advice would don't go on a board if you don't have D&O insurance, even privately held board. You should definitely look into that. It may not be as robust as a privately or a public company board, but I think that it's not even so much the risk that comes with a board of making the decision, it's the amount of work. So really, if you have a full-time job as a CEO, it's very difficult to sit on another public company board. You maybe can do one, but the volume of work and the intention to do it right is really onerous, so you need to make sure you make that commitment, you know.
And it may take longer now with these new regulations.
Definitely.
Yeah. Linda, thank you, Mary Beth.
I think part of sitting on a board and assessing where you can bring value is also looking at the conflict of interest that you may have, because a company that is in your industry may want you for that particular industry experience, but the fact is that you may have a conflict of interest because you are using the same vendors, because you're using the same consultants. So I think as you move into the potential of serving as board members, you need to really look at the relationships that you have with vendors, consultants, relatives, financiers, etc., because those may be a hindrance to you on particular boards.
I think one thing that I've noticed, I'm not on any public company boards, but I am on too many nonprofit boards, is that there's a lot more accountability that people are looking for from the board now. And I think we're starting to see the board members get a lot more engaged, particularly on the strategy side, as it relates to what mistakes have we made, what are the best practices of our industry, and how are we able to take advantage of the platform that we have. And so I think there's going to be a higher level of accountability and transparency, which will make it a little bit more sensitive, a lot more sensitive for the board members going forward.
Back to the legislation, there's pending legislation, I can't remember whose bill it is, that would require standing risk committees at every board member, or excuse me, at every publicly held company. So whether that happens or not is yet to be seen, but what it speaks of is that relationship of strategy and risk, and the board to be able to really understand that and divulge in that and be able to look at each of the assumptions and question them. So it's a big issue.
Thank you. One more question, and then we'll bring it out to the audience. This is kind of a newbie question, but Tucker Hart-Adams, who writes a column for us and has been on a number of boards, wrote about this when she kind of did an introduction to serving on boards, so I thought it was relevant. The idea that when you're on a board and you're just joining for the first time, if you don't like the decisions the boards are making, once the meeting's over, that's it, you're done. Tell me about some of those things, the discretion that you have to have. You're serving on a board, you have to follow what the board does. In terms of what are your responsibilities as a board member as far as discretion and outside the boardroom. Does that make sense?
I'm not certain I understand the question. You're asking, a decision has been made by the board to which you did not vote affirmatively,
Exactly.
and you did not agree with the plan of action, but your other board members did.
Correct.
And so you're asking, how do you handle that with your board members?
Well, and also in general. I mean, the idea that if you're serving on a board, once the decision's made, you're not going to be talking about it outside that boardroom. That's what I'm trying to drive at. Some of the basic responsibilities you have when you're serving on a board.
Well, it's just like Las Vegas. What happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas.
There you go. So
What happens in the boardroom
that's what I was
stays in the
trying to-
boardroom. I think one of the things that publicly held boards are very conscious of is that there is only one person that speaks for the company unless you're involved in board litigation against management or management litigation against the board, and that is that the board does not speak for the CEO. You have an investor relations representative to the shareholders and to the public, retail or institutional investors, and you as a board member are not speaking to any of those individuals. And sometimes board members collectively will visit a particular facility and they will mingle with the employees, and the employees will ask them about, do you think this is a really good company? Should I put all of my money in my 401k, in the stock, etc.? And you have to be able to respond to those questions appropriately. But it is a confidential nature, and once the board decision is made, the board decision is made, whether you voted for it or not. And when you came on the board, one of the questions you should have asked as part of the interview process was, how do you make decisions in this boardroom? Is it the CEO? Is it the lead director? Is it a show of hands? Is it private secret vote? You need to know those things as part of the interview process.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, there's a microphone around somewhere. Dave has it. And then you guys have a lot more complex questions than that. Thank you very much.
A question or comment was just a little bit earlier for Tracy. But it's just a moment of sharing with your permission, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dennis Gallagher, Denver City Auditor, and we had quite a little battle over what the audit committee at the city would look like. Because when I got elected auditor the first time, the mayor made all the appointments, including 2 members of the administration. What do you think about that? Enron right there in Denver. And so we finally worked out a proposal on the ballot, which I supported, which said the mayor makes 2 appointments, I make 2 appointments, and then the council makes 2 appointments. So there's a completely independent, yet separately appointed members of the audit committee, and it's working out real fine. I got to tell you, I just want to tell you, it's working out very well, and we certainly ask all the tough questions. I think if the mayor ever really watched the committee and saw some of those questions that his appointees make, he'd probably say, what have I done? And the same with the council. But they're asking great questions. And in the old days, the mayor hired the outside auditor, to that man's question, Mr. Sabate. And now the audit committee hires the outside auditor. So there's a real shift in the way things are being done, accountability, transparency, and holding the agencies accountable for the first time in a lot of memory. So I just wanted to share that. It was based on what Tracy was saying. Thank you.
I'm going to come back at you, Dennis. Do you do an audit committee evaluation?
We do sort of a little, at the end of union meetings, they have for the good of the order time, and we do that. We have not had anyone outside come in and look at the audit committee. And the administration, it's funny, the administration feels sometimes that the audit committee has just been so harsh on the agency whenever there's bad news. And other times they feel when we always try to give praise where praise is due. But the auditor's office every 3 years has a peer review. Good. And that's included as well, and we've gotten very good marks on that, I'm pleased to report. So, but I've been taking notes on what you all been saying. I don't think we have a sustainability committee in the audit committee at the city, but maybe we ought to, so thanks.
Oh, hang on, you're closest.
Okay.
So I have a limited board experience on a private board where I'm also in management. And I've been considering moving from spending all my time in execution to maybe a director type of a role with some other companies. And I'm curious what motivates you to move towards boards or gravitate towards boards as opposed to just executing in a more of a managerial role.
You sit on 4, you get to go first.
Well, I think a couple things for me that made my choice to really be more of a professional director. I'm a certified director from NACD and have an SEC credited financial expert. So I really pursued being a professional board of director. And for me, it was some of it was a personal choice and some of it was more from a business choice. From a personal standpoint, it gave me flexibility, even though there is a lot of hours and time spent. But not all of it is structured at certain meetings. A lot of it's done outside, and you can choose that. And given where I had some family situations, it was, it was a flexibility issue for me personally. But from a business standpoint and intellectual standpoint, it is very rewarding. The three public, paid boards that I sit on are so diverse, and I'm around a lot of smart people, and I learn a lot, and I feel I hopefully add value to their boards, but it's very intellectually stimulating to go, from one meeting talking about a medical device that relieves pain to talking about derivatives in a banking situation, and then to a business intelligence software that can take disparate, databases and come up with analytics that you need to manage a business. So, for me, it's a very, very rewarding and intellectually challenging and interesting experience. So that's why I chose that direction to go. You're not going to make anywhere near the amount of money in general that you would make being the CEO of a company, but unless the stock hits the long ball on there. But it's still it's a comfortable living, and it's something enjoyable, and it gave me the flexibility that I needed. So.
For me, it was a goal and a challenge. Back in the 1970s, I read that there were only 2% of the women that were on publicly held boards. And I had conversations with my female colleagues that were in officer positions at that time saying, how do we take this to the next step? How do we become CEOs, COOs? How do we move on to board of directors? So for me, it was a personal goal. But I agree with Mary Beth that it is the difference between being in the silo and running the business and the industry and having very great breadth in terms of how the various variables, I guess I would say, that Tracy has put up on the board affect the business and how they affect the people. And it is very rewarding and stimulating to be associated with people that have reached their personal peak in other industries and on other boards.
Okay, I'm going to alternate a little bit. We have some questions from our webinar audience, and I'm going to start with the most complicated one first. This is from Mike. Please discuss board member umbrella liability insurance, current charges, changes in policies, and who is paying the bill.
I'm certain I will not do the question justice. But on a general basis, both privately held and publicly held companies will purchase D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance, for their board of directors. And this insurance is in case board of directors are sued by anyone, by shareholders, by vendors, etc. But it is in doing their job as representing the shareholders that they may be sued, and the litigation expenses are then covered by the D&O insurance, and there are many complications involved in Side A, Side B, etc. But who pays the bill? The company pays for the insurance that covers the directors and officers. Now, individual directors are capable of purchasing their own personal liability insurance as well.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Suchia with Startup Guru, and my question is for Mary Beth, and this actually dovetails right into what you just talked about. Many of the people in DaVinci are startups and inventors. They don't have the money to underwrite a D&O policy. So what are the risks that you assess as a professional director that they could at least help the conversation along with their directors? Because a lot of them, they don't even understand the risks, and they should disclose that. They should get that out, because reality is that most startups don't have D&O insurance.
Yeah, correct. Most startups would not probably be able to afford it. You're trying to just keep the lights on probably most of the time. But, however, as you do grow, D&O insurance for the size of company that you have is not the same costs, that are incurred for a large publicly traded company that has other obligations. So I think, there sometimes is a perception that it's going to cost you, oodles of money. Now, it's all relative, small startup, maybe $10,000 in a year. So you have to decide, is that $10,000 worth that, or is it worth it to pay salaries for a couple of months of an employee or something along that line? So I think you got to really weigh and levy that. But in terms of the risk, even on the privately held company that I sit on, we have D&O insurance, not huge amount, does not have Side A policy. And just, we talked about Side A, and just so Side A, you know, it means that the director's defense is then definitely, there's a reserve amount for just the directors, not the other officers of the company, so that if a company is sued and they're tagging the directors to it, all that money could go away quickly in legal fees, and there's none left for the directors. So Side A separates that out, so that's why that talks about that. But on the privately held company that I did go on the board, I did increase my own personal umbrella policy. So that goes to the question from the webinar gentleman, just, you know, you don't want to have yourself wiped out, you know, because you're sitting on a board making not very much money, usually on a small privately held board or a startup company board. But there definitely is risks. Now, the risks can be lowered when you have a very small amount of shareholders. You know, if the shareholders are the 3 individuals that have started the company, you know, are you going to sue the directors when you're, you know, 3/4 of it? You know, so you have to weigh and levy that risk. Is that really, you know, a calculated risk on that? But don't be foolish either. You know, there is a risk out there because you could have, you know, a VC that comes in and doesn't think that you're doing the job and decides to sue you that because they own a certain percentage of it. So I think it's important to look at that.
I just add one other thing on the liability that you as an individual director may take on as a public director, and that is that you probably need to have your own attorney that will advise you how to separate your individual assets from those of your spouse, whether you hold those assets in a trust or whether you hold them jointly. And I personally have very little wealth. You know, I have a car and $25,000 in an account. So if I'm sued, that's all that they can take from me. They would have to sue my trust, they would have to sue my husband's trust, etc. So there are ways that you can work with your own individual legal counselor to parcel out your own assets so that you personally have very little. That also means that he can run away with the blonde and have a midlife crisis, and I'm left holding the bag.
Another question from our webinar from Gary. How does one identify board opportunities and connect with board recruiters? How do you identify board opportunities? Basically, somebody wants to know how do you get involved? How do you do what you do? How can I become a professional board member?
Without the name of Mary. Sometimes I do some executive coaching with candidates who would like to position themselves, and so that's really where we start, talking about a strategy to position yourself that really relies on your background and your most high-level experience and maybe international experience. Many boards, especially the larger companies, are looking for people who have international experience. And then we oftentimes do a board resume and bio that really highlights and brings out to those experiences. And if a person has sat on boards, they certainly would be a main part of that board resume and bio. And as far as the introduction to headhunters, I also do that at times. The headhunter industry is divided such that in energy, and that's my background too as far as board service. So I have different relationships across the country with 4 or 5 of the large firms and then a couple boutique headhunter firms. And that person that I contact within the industry, their niche is energy. So then there's the other side that we talked about, the nuance side, where it's going to different meetings, going to corporate governance conferences, and maybe you have experience where you could even present at some of the conferences. So, but you need to be very specific. You need to be very focused about what industry would see your experience of value. So,
my question is about an emerging risk. Any good business is going to have a good business model, a good operating model, or a good management model. And most companies have adapted their business models and operating models. And Gary Hamel, in his book, The Future of Management, says that most American companies are operating with a 19th century management model. Are boards becoming aware of this, and do they see this as a risk, and how are they dealing with this?
Yeah, that's really a good question. I mentioned just a little bit earlier about kind of the staid model that the board has, and it is trying to be effective in an increasingly complex world. So what I'm seeing now with some of the pre-legislation and then probably coming legislation is the changes will be at board composition. So much like the databases that we talked about that are kind of coming about, it's who's on the board and why and what their expertise. Mary Beth mentioned some of the other countries that have mandates as far as different populating the board with gender diversity. That's really what I see happening. And I think maybe a sense of global governance, conversations. I think Tom may even be a part of that, but certainly there's international finance standards coming. American will soon be adopting those. So those are the two kind of emerging things as far as change. Outside of that, who knows? To me, I wonder if there isn't a place for a board member to just be on the board for 2 years. Invest in the company, be part of it financially, but add your experience for 2 years and then rotate off so that you have that kind of fresh thought and fresh thinking. But besides that, that would be the only comments I have.
Another web question from Bill. What will be the challenges of separating CEO and board chair positions?
Great question. I actually have been asking this myself, and I have a paper, Harvard School just published a paper with a director I know here in Colorado on that. My thoughts on the challenge is what's best for the business, rather than a one-size-fits-all, which sometimes legislation wants to do. So what are the business components that make it such that is best to separate them or keep it together? And that's certainly up for debate. I have other comments, but do you guys want to contribute on this?
Well, the only thing I'd say on that is I agree with Tracy, is that I think it really depends on the business, and because what you need, and I can't remember who mentioned it, about making business decisions at these board meetings. That's really what it's all about. There needs to be some decisions made that are good, sound business decisions, and I think that you need to make sure that you've got the necessary talent and makeup on the board that can give you that good business decision-making process. So I think you're going to start to see a little bit more split between the chairman and the CEO coming in the near term.
My experience on the Pioneer Natural Resources Board was that we had a lead director, and the lead director had been on the board for a number of years, had a strong relationship with the chairman, but as lead director, his role changed significantly, and he really started representing the board members to the chairman, saying, we need different types of presentations. We need more inclusive discussions with management. We need to have a greater discussion on strategy. We need education. When the chairman is there, he is setting the agenda. The lead director is representing the board to the chair, saying this is what the board feels is appropriate, as opposed to you as the chairman. It also was a way that the board members could give feedback through the lead director without being individually identified.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Linda is talking about, and that's how it works for most of the boards that I do sit on. And again, it really is a business decision. So if it's working, and it's working well, and you've got the board and the shareholders at mind, and the discussions are, that there's not a filter that the CEO is taking over, and that's where the lead director comes in, I think you need to make that decision if they're capable of it. And if the CEO is removed or chooses to do something else, that may give you an opportunity for that to change it, to have a separation of it. But keep in mind, it's not a mandate to have that separation. between chairman and the CEO. You just need to disclose it in your proxy and let them know that.
Thanks. Before we take the next question, I just want to make an observation now. Here we have 4 people used to making decisions. See those stools down there? Those are usually where the panelists sit, and I usually stand. We're all in comfy chairs, because very quickly, hey, wait a minute, and we started putting the chairs on the stage. I think we have a new format here, soft, comfortable chairs, so thank you for making that board decision. Another question, Dave?
Hi, Alexia Parks, voting.com. Michael, you made an early opening comment about perhaps women on boards because women as consumers like to shop, and therefore it's good to have their representative on board. Back in the early 80s, I was sent by the RAND Corporation to Washington, D.C. I'm a communications expert, and I was representing public opinion. I was the disruptive thinker on an energy technology company that included government and lawyers and so forth. But I was put on there, they said, because one of the strategies of putting women on boards is because men perform better. It's a biological thing. And they have to show off, they have to think, they have to be more creative. Yeah, and so that was their strategy at the time back in the 80s. The thing I wanted to talk about is that concept of disruptive thinker, because a new trend emerging in 2010 and beyond is, it's called conscious capitalism. Sustainability is one, aspect of that, but it speaks more to the transformed individual within the corporation. So it's like the disruptive thinker or multiplied thinkers within the corporation. So my question is for boards, how do disruptive thinkers find their way onto the boards? But beyond that, are the boards keeping their eye on the internal changes that are taking place, those transformed employees of a company that are far more disruptive if they decide the company policies are wrong and they need to change from the inside out? So are they paying attention? And how do disruptive thinkers get on those boards and have an impact?
I just want to make an observation. I sit on a nonprofit board, and one thing that Tracy talked about is the idea of being on a board for a couple years. And I think that rotating thing makes a big difference. I'm on a nonprofit board, and I joined with a few other people at the same time. And we were kind of involved in a new program, and we kind of had to push a little bit because there are people on the board that have been on there for many, many years and said, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. And what we were trying to do, we did. And we had to reach a point where we said, you know what, even if it doesn't work, we'll fail nobly. We have to try something. We want to do something. We don't want to just take up a seat on this board. We want to do something, It was the first time that all 3 or 4 of us had been on a board. We wanted to have an impact, and I think that's really important. And over time, because it was a civil conversation, over time, we worked as a group. I mean, the people that were doubting what we were doing went on board, and it had a real positive result. So I think that's, for me, very, very important.
I'll take a stab at your question here, and I think it's really 2 parts. The disruptive thinker aspect, I think, needs to make sure the person is not disruptive in the board setting, but still able to get the ideas that hadn't been presented or hadn't been thought of, or maybe were said can't be done, et cetera. But talking about that, there is a point that the boards need to be collegial, but not necessarily just agreeing, and it's always a unanimous decision on that. And so when you have the disruptive thinker, which I think is a very advantageous type of board person to have, because it will bring new ideas and new thoughts, or will challenge the question. But a lot of times they need to do it in smaller groups. You need to have the method that you may have the idea, you talk to one other board member, say, look, this is what I'm thinking about. Go to the next board member, kind of get some agreement here at validation before you present it to the full board. So I think there's a methodology for that disruptive thinker to be successful versus being just disruptive. But that quality is very important to have on a board, because that sometimes can be the deciding factor between good companies and great companies of what they're doing. Back to your question about the culture in there, and it is from the top down, and Linda talked about it. The main thing in a public company board for the board is to decide on who the CEO is, whether you keep the person or you don't keep the person, and how you develop that person. And if that CEO has the qualities qualities and the capabilities and the management style that you desire, then that style will start to permeate itself throughout the company. But if it doesn't, that other style will permeate itself throughout the company. So you need to make sure as a board member, as your number one role in hiring and firing the CEO, that that person will create the culture that you think is desirous to return shareholder value and make the shareholders, wealthy, and all the other good things that come with it. And then you also, not just shareholders, but stakeholders that are involved there.
Great question. On the simple side, if I'm asked, I recommend that boards, when there's a critical decision, assign a devil's advocate. And just have that person have that role for that time, so that there's someone that it's okay, we've all agreed, to have that kind of, as you're saying, kind of disruptive thinking. The other thing that I'm just starting to talk about with boards is followership. And so we're all leaders and we're all follows during the day at the board meetings, and how to ask leading questions so that you don't put people off, but you ask it in a manner, so it's the art, but also that it's poignant, So, but this takes some thought and some training too, so those are my comments to that.
Hi, my name is Susan Penny Brown, and I'm a small business owner for about 13 years. And my company helps small businesses make good decisions about technology. It's really IT strategy. So I have no outside board obligations at the time. What I'm interested in, though, is nonprofit. And, there's a lot of nonprofits that would just love another person on the board and another point of view. And my question is really about, what are the questions to ask to find a board where I guess to find a nonprofit board that is a little more systematic in their decision making, so that it's a good contribution. You know what I mean? How to sort through where that time can be spent valuably in making a real contribution.
That's a very good question. First of all, you've got to be on a board that of an organization that you're passionate about. So if you have that kind of passion for that particular organization, then you've already developed some questions that you're going to want to ask. And when you get invited to participate on that board, that's your opportunity to ask them, actually interview them rather than them interview you, as to how they operate. What are your missions and goals and objectives, and talk to as much of the staff as you can. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I think Tracy has said it several times, and I know Mary has also mentioned it several times, that there is no such thing, at least I don't think, as a stupid question or a silly question. They're all great questions. And you may not think it's a very good question, but believe me, it is, because it's important to you. And I think that don't ever stop. I do that with people that work for me. I always like to ask them questions rather than them asking me questions. It opens up the dialogue, and it also gives you the opportunity to hear what their initiatives are.
And there's a great website called charitynavigator.com that has tax forms, all kinds of metrics for lots and lots of nonprofits. I've seen a lot of Colorado nonprofits on that site. We're all done, so let's give a round of applause for our wonderful panelists.